My son's wife left me a voice message 3 weeks before the wedding I'd already paid for. Don't come Saturday. My mom gets anxious around you, and honestly, it's cleaner this way. You can still cover the balance, right? I listened to it twice in my truck outside the hardware store. Then I drove home, opened my laptop, and started canceling everything. By the time the rehearsal dinner rolled around, there were 41 missed calls on my phone, and that was only the beginning. Before I go on, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel, and tell me down in the comments what time it is where you're sitting right now. I'm 71 years old. I spent 38 of those years pouring concrete and reading blueprints for a contracting outfit outside Columbus, Ohio. My hands still look like they belong to a younger, harder man, even if the rest of me has gone soft and gray. My wife Eleanor passed 11 years ago this March. Pancreatic, quick and cruel, the way that one always is. After she was gone, I had exactly one thing left in this world that mattered to me, and that was our boy. His name is Wesley, 33 now. Smart kid, always was. Got his mother's eyes and, I'm sorry to say, a little of my own stubbornness, though he'd point at me and say I had more. We were close once. When Eleanor was sick, it was Wesley and me trading nights at the hospital, eating cold sandwiches in that fluorescent waiting room, holding each other up. I thought that kind of thing welded a father and son together, permanently. I thought wrong. The trouble had a name, and the name was Brielle. I want to be fair here, because anger makes a man exaggerate, and I've had time now to sand the edges off this story. Brielle wasn't a monster. She was just a woman who looked at me and saw a checkbook with a face attached, and the worst part is, I handed her that impression myself, gift-wrapped, over the course of 3 years. Let me back up. Wesley met Brielle at a wedding, of all places. His college roommate's wedding down in Cincinnati. He called me the next week sounding like a teenager again, and I was glad. A father wants his son to be happy. I drove down to meet her a month later at a little Italian place she picked, the kind with no prices on the menu, which should have told me something. She was polished, beautiful, I'll give her that. She talked a lot about her mother, Diane, and about the wedding she'd always pictured for herself since she was a little girl. Vineyard, string quartet, 200 guests, the whole production. I remember driving home that night thinking, well, that's going to cost somebody a fortune. I didn't yet understand the somebody was going to be me. It started small, the way these things do. Wesley's car threw a transmission, and he was short, and I covered it. Then it was first and last month's deposit on the apartment they wanted, the nice one in the short north with the exposed brick that Brielle loved. $1,100 a month, and they could only swing about 6 of it between them. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things in those years. When they got engaged, Brielle came to me directly, not Wesley. Brielle. She sat across from me at my own kitchen table, the table Eleanor and I bought at an estate sale in 1986, and she laid out the wedding budget on a printed spreadsheet like she was pitching a job. $48,000. She'd already picked the venue, a restored barn at a vineyard out near Granville, deposit due in 2 weeks. She slid the paper across the table and looked at me with those calm, expectant eyes, and she said, Wesley said you'd want to be part of making this special. Wesley said? Not Wesley asked. Not we were hoping. Wesley said, like my participation was a foregone conclusion, a line item already entered in the spreadsheet. I should have said no right then. God, I've replayed that kitchen moment 1,000 times. But Wesley was standing in the doorway behind her, not saying anything, just looking at his shoes, and I saw Eleanor in his face. And I thought, this is the last big thing I can do for him. So I said yes, $48,000. Most of what I'd set aside from selling the company truck and a chunk of my IRA that I promised Eleanor's memory I'd never touch. I want you to understand, I didn't resent the money. Not at first. I was proud. I told the fellas at the diner where I get my coffee that I was paying for my son's wedding, and I meant it like a man means it when he's done something right. I paid the venue deposit. I paid the caterer. I paid the photographer, the florist, the band, a string quartet for the ceremony, and a full band for the reception because Brielle couldn't choose, and I said, why not have both? I paid for 210 people to eat filet mignon and salmon at a vineyard I would attend for exactly one evening. And here's the thing I noticed but didn't let myself feel. In 3 years, Brielle never once thanked me. Not really. There were these little performances of gratitude, a quick, "You're the best, Howard," tossed over her shoulder, but it had the weight of a receipt. A transaction acknowledged. Never once did she ask how I was doing. Never once, after Eleanor came up in conversation, did she ask me about my wife, the woman whose absence sat at every holiday table like an empty chair. To Brielle, I was the budget. I was the part of the wedding that wrote checks. Wesley got quieter and quieter through all of it. I'd call him and Brielle would answer his phone. I'd suggest dinner, and there'd always be a reason it couldn't happen. The boy who'd shared cold sandwiches with me in a hospital basement was becoming a stranger, and I told myself it was just the stress of the wedding, and after things would settle. After we'd be close again. I built my whole patience on the foundation of that word. After, the voice message came on a Tuesday, March 18th. I had been at Butner's Hardware picking up sandpaper for a dresser I was refinishing, a little project to keep my hands busy in the evenings, and when I got back to the truck, my phone showed a voicemail from Brielle's number. Not Wesley's, Brielle's. I figured it was about the seating chart or some last detail, and I pressed play with the engine still off and the cold seeping into the cab. "Hey, Howard, so, change of plans for Saturday. Don't come to the wedding. I know that sounds harsh, but my mom gets really anxious around you for some reason, and I'm not going to spend my wedding day managing her feelings. Wesley agrees it's cleaner this way. You can still cover the final balance to the venue, right? It's due Thursday. Anyway, thanks for understanding. 11 seconds. I know because I played it enough times to count. 11 seconds to uninvite me from the wedding. I had spent $48,000 to create. I sat in that truck for a long time, long enough that the windows fogged up from my breathing. I want to tell you I felt rage, but that came later. What I felt first was something more like falling, like the floor of an elevator dropping out from under you. My mom gets anxious around you for some reason. There was no reason. I'd met Diane exactly twice, and both times I'd been polite to the point of invisibility, and Wesley agrees. My son agreed I shouldn't come to his own wedding, and he didn't even have the spine to tell me himself. He let her do it. He let her leave me a voicemail like I was a vendor whose services were no longer required except please keep paying. You can still cover the final balance, right? That sentence is the one that did it. That's the sentence that turned the falling feeling into something cold and clear and very, very steady. Because in that sentence, I finally heard, plain as a church bell, exactly what I was to these people. I wasn't family. I wasn't a father. I was a payment method that had unfortunately developed feelings, and those feelings were now an inconvenience to be managed out of the room while the account stayed open. I drove home. I remember the drive being strange, like the town had gone slightly unfamiliar. The same streets I'd driven for 40 years suddenly belonging to somebody else's life. I let myself into the house. Eleanor's reading chair still sat by the window where it always had. I stood in the kitchen by that estate sale table, and I made myself a cup of coffee. I didn't drink, and I opened my laptop. Here is what most people don't realize about paying for a wedding. When you're the one whose name and card are on the contracts, you have power. Real, legal, contractual power. I hadn't just handed over cash. I'd signed agreements. The venue contract was in my name, Howard Vance, because Brielle had wanted it that way so the deposits wouldn't ding her credit. The caterer, the band, the florist, the photographer, every single vendor had a signed agreement with me, Howard Vance, as the responsible paying party. They'd uninvited the man who held all the contracts and then asked him to pay the rest. I started with the venue because the final balance was due Thursday, and that was a lever Brielle had so helpfully pointed me toward. I pulled up the contract. There it was in clear language. Cancellation by the contracting party more than 72 hours before the event forfeits the deposit, but voids all remaining balance. I did the arithmetic in my head. I'd lose the deposit. I'd save the $18,000 final balance that was due in 2 days, and there would be no venue. I picked up the phone, and I called them. A pleasant young woman answered. I told her my name and that I needed to cancel the event scheduled for Saturday. She paused, and I could hear her clicking. "The Vance Sutton wedding?" she said. "Sir, that's this Saturday. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I said. "Change of plans. I'm the contracting party. I'd like to cancel." She tried, gently, to talk me out of it, the way they do. Was I sure? There'd be a forfeiture of deposit. Did I want to speak with a manager? I told her I understood the terms, I'd read them, and yes, I was sure. I had never in my life been more sure of anything. She processed it. She sent me a confirmation email while I was still on the line. The Vance Sutton wedding, canceled, 4 days out. Then I called the caterer. Same thing. Then the band. Then the string quartet, who were very gracious about it. Then the florist, who'd been planning to bring in peonies flown up from somewhere. Peonies that now would not be flown. I canceled the photographer. I canceled the vintage car Brielle had wanted to arrive in. I canceled the block of hotel rooms I'd put a card down to hold. One by one, over the course of about 2 hours at my kitchen table, I unbuilt the wedding I'd spent 3 years building. Each call took maybe 10 minutes. Each one felt like setting down a sandbag I hadn't known I was carrying. My phone, I should mention, stayed silent through all of it. Brielle had no idea. Wesley had no idea. They were out there somewhere in their evening picking a first dance song maybe, while their entire wedding quietly evaporated, vendor by vendor behind them. When I finished, I sat back. The coffee was stone cold. The house was quiet in that particular way it gets after dark. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that because I know how this story sounds. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like a man who finally stopped paying a bill he should have stopped paying years ago. Tired, clear, a little hollow. Mostly I felt the absence of a weight and the strange grief that comes when you put down something heavy and realize how long your arms had been aching. I saved every cancellation confirmation to a folder on my desktop. I didn't have a plan for them yet. Something in me, maybe the part that read contracts for a living, just said, keep the paper. So I kept the paper. Then I went to bed and, to my own surprise, I slept like a stone. They found out Wednesday afternoon. Brielle called the venue about some detail, a chair count or a linen color, and the venue told her the event had been canceled by the contracting party. I can only imagine the silence on her end of that phone. By the time she got off with them and started dialing me, it was a little after 2. I was in my garage sanding that dresser when the call started. I'd left my phone on the workbench and I watched it light up. Brielle, Brielle, Brielle. Brielle, then Wesley, then Brielle again. I let them ring. There's a rhythm to a phone you're ignoring, a kind of pulse, and I kept sanding in time with it, long even strokes, the way my own father taught me when I was a boy. By the time I finally picked up, on maybe the 15th or 16th try, my hands were white with dust. "Howard?" Brielle's voice came out high and tight, all the polish stripped off it. "Howard, what did you do? The venue says the wedding's canceled. They said you canceled it. That's a mistake, right? Tell me that's a mistake." "It's not a mistake. It's not a mistake. It's not a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said. I heard in the background Wesley's voice asking, "What? What is it? What's he saying?" I heard the sound of a life starting to come apart, and God help me, I felt very calm. "You can't do that," she said. "You can't just cancel our wedding. The invitations are out. People have flights. My mother has a dress. You can't." "I'm the contracting party," I said. "Every contract is in my name. You wanted it that way, remember? So legally, yes, I can, and I did." "This is insane. This is Wesley. Talk to him." Fumbling, the phone changing hands. "Then my son, Dad. His voice was lower than hers, but it shook. "Dad, what is this? You really canceled everything?" And here's where I'll tell you the truth of the moment, because it's the part I'm least proud of and most sure I'd do again. For 3 years I had been quiet. I had swallowed every slight, paid every bill, made every excuse, and it all came up at once, calm and cold, like water finding the lowest point. "3 weeks ago your wife left me a voicemail," I said, "telling me not to come to your wedding, telling me Diane gets anxious around me, telling me you agreed, and then, in the same breath, asking me to pay the rest of the balance. Do you remember that, son? Did you know she sent that?" Silence. Long enough that I had my answer before he gave it. "Dad, it wasn't like—" "Did you know," I said, "that she uninvited me from your wedding and asked me to keep paying for it? Yes or no?" "It's complicated," he said, which is what people say when the answer is yes and they don't want to be the kind of person the answer makes them. "It's not complicated at all," I said. "It's the simplest thing in the world. You let your wife throw me out of your life and keep my wallet, so I took my wallet and went home. That's all this is. You didn't want me at the wedding. Fine. The wedding doesn't want my money either. Seems fair to me." Brielle was back on the line now. Both of them must have had it on speaker, and she was crying, or doing the thing that sounds like crying. "We have 200 guests coming Saturday. What are we supposed to do? You've ruined everything. You've humiliated us. My family is flying in from Arizona. And I imagine," I said, "you'll need to call them and explain, or you can pay for a wedding yourselves like grown adults with jobs. Wesley makes a fine living. You got 2 incomes. Figure it out. I managed to plan and pay for a whole wedding on my own, so I know it can be done." "You're a cruel old man," Brielle said, and there was real venom in it now, the polish gone for good. "Wesley, your father is a cruel, bitter old man." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm a cruel old man who isn't paying. Good night." I hung up. The phone started ringing again immediately, and I turned it face down on the workbench and went back to my sanding. By the time I quit for the night and turned it over, there were 41 missed calls and a string of texts that started furious and turned, toward the end, almost frightened. "We can fix this. Dad, please call me. Howard, you don't understand what you've done. Dad." Just Dad. That last one, at 11:40 p.m., from Wesley. I didn't answer. I went to bed. I'd love to tell you I lay awake tormented. I didn't. I slept. What happened next is the part I didn't expect, the part that still sits funny with me. Saturday came and went, the day that was supposed to be the wedding. I spent it doing yard work and finishing the dresser, and I assumed that was the end of it. I figured they'd scramble, throw together something small, be furious at me forever, and I'd made my peace with that. Losing my son felt like the price of finally standing up straight, and I decided I'd rather stand up straight and alone than stay bent over and surrounded. But on Sunday, Brielle did something I should have seen coming. She went online. My nephew stood in my living room and told me the batch me that worried and said, "Uncle Howard, have you seen what Brielle posted?" I hadn't. I don't do much with the Facebook, but I logged in and there it was, and it had over 400 reactions. She'd written a long post. I won't quote the whole thing, but I'll give you the shape of it. The headline was about how sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who betray you. She wrote that her wedding had been destroyed at the last minute by her father-in-law, that he was a controlling man who couldn't stand to let his son go, that he'd weaponized his money to punish them for setting healthy boundaries, that 200 guests had shown up to a canceled wedding, that her elderly mother had been humiliated. She wrote that they were heartbroken but choosing to move forward without toxic family. There was a photo of her and Wesley looking tearful. There were over 100 comments, almost all of them roasting me. Disgusting, what a monster. Some men can't handle their sons becoming men. Praying for you both. I sat there and read every comment. I'm not going to pretend it didn't land. It did. To have 100 strangers who'd never met me, who didn't know about the voicemail, who didn't know about 3 years of silence and slights, decide in 30 seconds that I was a villain, that stung in a place I didn't know I still had. My first instinct was to type a reply, to defend myself, lay out the facts, the voicemail, the contracts, that you can still cover the balance right. But I sat with my fingers over the keyboard and I thought about what that would actually be. A public brawl with my son's wife where everyone took sides and the truth got buried under who could perform their pain the loudest. No, I closed the laptop, but I didn't delete the folder on my desktop, the paper, the cancellation confirmations, and more importantly, the voicemail. I still had the voicemail. For a few days I did nothing. I let the post do its work, let it gather its comments, let Brielle play the grieving bride to her audience. I went to my coffee at the diner and a couple of the fellas had heard something secondhand and gave me looks and I just drank my coffee. I went to my woodworking. I let it sit. And then on the following Wednesday, something tipped over in me. I'd gotten a message, not from family, from a woman named Patrice, an old colleague's wife, someone I barely knew, who'd seen Brielle's post through a mutual friend. She wrote, "I don't know the whole story, but I just want to say, anyone who would publicly shame an elderly man like this probably isn't telling you everything. I hope you're okay, Howard. That little message from a near stranger did what 100 hateful comments couldn't. It reminded me that the truth was a thing that existed independent of who was shouting. And it reminded me that I had the truth, recorded 11 seconds of it sitting in my pocket. So I made my own post, the only one I've ever made. I want you to know I labored over it, kept it short and dry, no exclamation points, no insults. I wrote, roughly, I've seen the post about me regarding the canceled wedding. Since this was made public, I'll respond publicly once. Below is the voicemail I received 3 weeks before the wedding from my son's fiancée. I'd paid for the entire wedding, every vendor in my name. After you listen, you can decide for yourselves what kind of man I am. And I attached the audio, Brielle's own voice. Don't come to the wedding. My mom gets anxious around you. Wesley agrees it's cleaner this way. You can still cover the final balance, right? I posted it and I set the phone down and I went and made dinner. I didn't refresh it. I didn't watch. I fried 2 eggs and ate them standing at the counter the way Eleanor always hated, and I let the internet do whatever the internet was going to do. By morning, it had turned. Carolyn called me almost laughing with relief. The comments under Brielle's post had flipped. People were going back and listening to the voicemail and coming back furious, but not at me. She uninvited you and asked you to keep paying. Some folks who'd called me a monster on Sunday were now deleting their comments. A few of Brielle's own friends, the honest ones, wrote things like, Brielle, this isn't the story you told us. Somebody who'd been at one of their dinners wrote that they'd always wondered why Wesley's dad sat so quiet at the end of the table while the two of them ran the show. The whole shape of it inverted overnight. And the thing that inverted it wasn't my anger. It was just 11 seconds of the truth in her own voice. Brielle took her post down. Wesley's number went quiet for a while. I figured we were done, the two of us, and I started learning to be done. I signed up for that woodworking class at the senior center I'd been eyeing. I started having Sunday dinner with Carolyn and her husband. I drove out to Eleanor's grave more often than I had in years, and I talked to her, told her the whole thing, and I could hear what she'd say back, which was something like, well, it's about time, Howard, in that dry way she had. It was almost 2 months later, the middle of May, when there was a knock at my door on a Saturday afternoon. I wasn't expecting anybody. I opened it and there was Wesley, alone. He looked thinner. He looked like a man who hadn't been sleeping. He stood on my porch the way he used to stand when he'd broken something as a boy and come to confess it. Dad, he said, can I come in? I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the estate sale table, and I made coffee, and for a while neither of us said anything. The river light came through the window the way it does in the late afternoon. I listened to it, he finally said. The voicemail. I made her play it for me, the whole thing. I knew she told you not to come. I didn't know. I didn't know she asked you to keep paying. I swear to God, Dad, I didn't know about that part. And the rest of it, the part I did know, I let it happen. I let her speak for me because it was easier than standing up to her, and that's the worst thing I've ever done, and it was to you. His voice broke on the last word. I've been such a coward. I didn't say anything for a bit. I let him sit in it the way I'd had to sit in that truck in the hardware store parking lot. We're separating, he said. Brielle and me. It wasn't just this. This just turned the lights on. I started seeing how the whole thing ran, how everything was about what people could do for her. I think I knew the whole time and didn't want to know. Mom would have seen it in 5 minutes. Your mother, I said, saw it the night I met her, I think. She just hoped I'd see it on my own. He asked me then if I could forgive him. And I want to tell you something I learned, sitting at that table with my grown son crying into a coffee mug. Forgiveness and going back to how things were are two different things. I told him I forgave him, and I meant it, because carrying the alternative would have cost me more than it cost him. But I also told him I wasn't ever going to be the bank again. Not for him, not for anybody. If we built something back, it would be built on him wanting his father, not his father's wallet, and that would take time, and we'd go slow, and there'd be boundaries solid as the dresser I'd just finished sanding. He nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't ask for a thing except whether he could come by next Sunday, and that, more than any apology, was how I knew something real had shifted. Because in 33 years, I don't think Wesley had ever once asked to see me without a reason attached to it. He stayed 2 hours. I showed him the dresser. He told me about an apartment he was looking at, a smaller one he could afford himself. When he left, we hugged on a porch, and he held on a beat longer than men in our family usually do. I stood there after his car pulled away, and I looked out at the yard going green, and I thought about that 11-second voicemail, and the 41 missed calls, and the $48,000, and what all of it had bought me in the end. Not the wedding. The wedding never happened, but it bought me back something I'd traded away a piece at a time for 3 years without noticing, the same way you don't notice your own keys getting heavier in your pocket. It bought me back the simple, unfashionable idea that I was a person and not a payment, and that love that only flows one direction isn't love at all. It's just billing. I've got a saying I've come to from all this, and I'll leave you with it. Money can buy you a seat at almost any table, but it can't buy you respect at that table. And if you keep paying to sit somewhere you're not wanted, all you're really doing is funding your own loneliness. I stopped funding mine. Best money I never spent. If this story meant something to you, do me a favor and like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, would you have canceled the wedding, or would you have paid and stayed home? I read every one. There's another story waiting for you right over there. Thanks for listening. For 3 years, I paid and called it love. And the strange thing is, I never once asked myself what I was actually buying. I know now. I was buying a seat at a table where nobody wanted me, and the rent on that seat was my own dignity, paid monthly, in full, no questions asked. The voicemail Brielle left me didn't break anything that wasn't already broken. It just turned the lights on in a room I'd been sitting in blind. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, sitting at Eleanor's old table on these quiet evenings. Everything that happened, every consequence, ran in a straight line from a single root. Brielle treated me like a payment because I had taught her with 3 years of automatic yeses that a payment was all I was. Wesley let her speak for him because I had spent his whole life making things easy, paving every road so smooth he never learned to walk a rough one. The wedding collapsed, not because I was cruel, but because the whole thing had been built on my money instead of their respect, and a house built on the wrong foundation comes down the second you stop holding it up. I didn't punish anyone. I just stopped propping up a structure that should have been standing on its own legs years ago. If you take one thing from an old man who learned all of this far too late, let it be this. Decency in a family has to run both directions, and the day you start tolerating contempt because you're afraid of losing someone, you've already lost them. You've just agreed to keep paying for the privilege of pretending otherwise. Doing the right thing meant saying no, even when it cost me my son's good opinion for a while. That's the hardest kind of right there is. But knowing the right thing isn't enough on its own. I had to think clearly, too. I had to read the contracts I'd signed, understand that the power was actually mine, keep the paperwork, keep that voicemail instead of deleting it in a fit of grief. When Brielle went public and 100 strangers called me a monster, the smart move wasn't to scream back. It was to let 11 seconds of the truth speak in her own voice. Anger would have buried me. A clear head set me free. And then it took something else. Something harder than being right or being clever. It took the plain stubbornness to sit in that fogged-up truck, hear what I'd become, and choose to change it after 71 years of being a soft touch. To let the phone ring 41 times and not pick up. To forgive my boy without ever again becoming his bank. That kind of standing firm doesn't feel noble while you're doing it. It just feels lonely and cold. The warmth comes after when you realize you can finally look at yourself in the dark glass of your own window and recognize the man staring back. I lost a wedding, I found a son, and somewhere in between I found myself.